Hi everyone. Today we're talking about actuarial education. No matter where you are in your actuarial career, your professional education and ongoing lifelong learning will form a strong foundation for your career success. Joining us for this discussion today is Mike Callan, an experienced actuary whose 30-year plus global career has spanned industry, leadership, and education. Mike's the Executive General Manager of Education for the Actuaries Institute, and he's been leading the charge to improve consistency across the qualification program to equip the next generation of actuaries with a strong foundation to have great actuarial careers. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Mm. Mike, I know we share a passion for education and lifelong learning, so I'm really looking forward to our conversation today as well. But first, Mike, how do you use your actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world?
I manage a team of fellows who really want to supercharge the profession by creating a world-leading qualification education program. That will have the benefit of faster qualification times so people can get on with their early career responsibilities and also be young enough to engage fully in their lifelong learning journey.
Fantastic. So many different dimensions to that, and so important to make sure our future actuaries have the skills that they need to, like you said, get on with their career and make a difference in the world as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very good, very good. So, I mean, you've had a really interesting career. You've worked in different countries around the world, you've worked across different roles, and now you're in education. How did you how did you find yourself as an actuarial educator, Mike?
I'll start by saying, how did I find myself becoming an actuary?
Ah, okay, yep.
I grew up in the UK, as you may be able to tell from my accent. I didn't hear the word actuary until I was in my honours year at university, when many people were going off to be accountants and computer programmers. Then some people started to say they were going to be actuaries. I was dead set on doing a PhD, which I did. But during that process, that word keeps coming back in my head. I found out that it was about using maths in business. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. I didn't have any idea what it really meant, but decided to become an actuary. I joined a medium-sized mutual life insurance office in the west of England, in Bristol. I stayed with them for about 18 years in many different roles as they grew from a medium size, being purchased by other companies to be ultimately a large UK bank. And during that process, I had a variety of different roles in product development, as well as other things, standard valuation, etc. But in product development roles, I really felt that the actuarial education notes that we had put us on a massive pedestal compared with others because not the technical maths components, but the structure of how an office worked, how information flew around there. So I found myself living a sort of product management type role, but also the ability to talk with the disparate departments, IT, human resources, administration, on how it all fitted together. So I like being the center of that. And I realized it was the education components of that I
Mm.
really enjoy. I like getting up in front of salespeople and explaining products and fielding their questions. And then your career progresses, and I ended up being head of actuarial for a continental European division. That then gave me the ability to spend some time with the junior fellows on helping them understand what the notes really meant, what the exams meant, and how do we transform that? How do we apply them in practice?
Mm.
So, and I like to continue that journey throughout. I continued that throughout my working life. Emigrated to Australia, had a bit of experience for a few years in Deloitte and a short period in AMP. And by this time, I really liked what I was doing, but a job came up in Monash, which Monash University down here in Melbourne,
Mm.
which was fascinating. Which was, can you come along to set up what they call the Part Two program, the control cycle, and the asset liability management? And I thought, I'll give it a go. Went to
Mm.
do it, loved it, spent a few years because it really gave you the chance to rewrite the course notes in a way that you would have appreciated as a young
Mm.
person. And so that was really useful. I'm happy to do that. And then I was very lucky in about 2018 where council made a decision to employ people, actuaries directly. So I came on board and a few others, Amanda Aiken, as you know,
Yep.
and few others came on board, and we helped set up this new program in the fellowship. So that's the sort of transformation from industry to actuarial education.
Wow, what a great transformation, Mike. And how powerful that you've had that deep industry experience. You know what it's like being an actuary working for a company and the skills that are needed beyond just the technical as well.
Absolutely. And it's trying to help people understand that the technical skills take time to learn, but they
Mm,
take many years to apply and practice.
yeah,
And what's great about when you teach younger people, um, when you've got lots of experience, is you can tell them the war stories.
yeah.
And the feedback you get is you can teach people, here's a list of 5 things to do,
Mm,
amongst 20 other thousand lists of things to do, and it's hard to mean anything. But then you tell a story about how you didn't apply the fifth one and everything fell over, and they remember it. So it's those little pearls of wisdom that you can give to
mm,
people to think
mm,
about stuff. So we're trying not trying to get them to remember every single list of information, but we're
mm.
trying to sort of change their brain to think like an actuary, to be able
Yeah.
to that ability to stand back from questions and think more widely than maybe some other people do.
Yeah, and that's so important, isn't it? Because we are all a work in progress throughout our careers. And so, even if I think back to what I knew and what I learned as part of my foundational actuarial studies, some of it I don't remember. Not all of it I knew what to do with at the time. So it's sort of this evolution.
That's right. There's a very famous physics guy, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think his name is. I'm horrible with names, hopeless, sorry. But I've heard him explain it a few times. We taught you these math things, not because we wanted you to remember that formula, but we wanted to change the way that your brain thought. And remember Naomi, last year's president, she was always talking about this thing in the brain of how the elasticity of being an actuary, and so it's not the specifics, it's the general way it shapes your brain was that I think was really useful.
Yeah, amazing. And amazing that you've got that context and perspective to be able to bring that to the education process as well, that sort of understanding of that evolution and the way that we need to change.
Absolutely. I'm a bit of a history buff, so I do like the old actuarial history, and you can look
Uh-huh.
through that stuff. But I felt one of the biggest challenge was everything sort of looks a bit easy when you're a bit sort of long in the tooth because you've done it so many times.
Mm,
And you have to remember that somebody who's 20, 22, 23, the average student, um, their understanding of the world is very different to yours or mine.
yeah.
And so what we've done in the new program, if you like, is really try and think from that bottom up perspective. So being underneath the pile of information, how
Mm,
can we scaffold it in a way that it makes sense to people?
right.
Because otherwise you find that people they don't grasp some of the concepts we teach them because perversely enough, we don't bother teaching them because they're so obvious to us that we don't.
And we forget to teach those basics, but actually they're really important foundations.
Really simple techniques. I mean, every actuary knows one of the main things we do is have a great ability to set expectations and measure actual results. That vital component in the monitoring process that we do. And we just do that so obviously.
Mm,
When you go through the course of reading from the foundation onwards, it's touched upon very, very lightly, even though that's a core component of what we do. So it's
mm,
just bringing those ideas and thinking it's touched upon lightly because it's so obvious to us. Why would we mention it?
mm,
In
mm,
fact, if you don't know about it, it's confusing. And I've had chats with other people throughout the years where they're not actuaries, and they have no concept of the distinction between the expected one and the actual one. And it's a
mm.
bit by magic that we do it, but no, it's our bread and butter.
It is. It's quite fundamental. And then the overlay of all of that is that the world's changing around us. Technology is changing. We've got things like generative AI. And so thinking about teaching and learning in that context as well, we have to keep modernizing and revisiting and improving as we go to make sure our students are well equipped.
For those of us who are natural lifelong learners, it's just a wonderful opportunity that information is changing so rapidly and we can sort of fight to get on top of it. But let's remember we're a small profession, but there are very many people in there who are willing to give their time to the
That's true.
profession.
Yeah.
And so you're not on your own. For example, on the Gen AI, we know that the Data Science Practice Committee are very sort of a bunch of volunteers who give their time generously to the profession, but they're always sharing information.
Mm.
And many of them are working at the forefront of those
Mm.
ideas. And
Mm.
so we, as a member, general member, we can sort of quickly see
Yeah.
what's going on up
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my experience, Mike, the profession's always been full of people who are willing to help each other and to share advice and share information. So I think there's such a great opportunity for us to be able to work together in that way and collectively kind of ensure that we're all learning what we need to.
Absolutely. And one of the experiments that we're running at the moment is with members of DSPC.
Mhm.
We essentially created a modern version of a reading list,
Oh,
which
really?
is which is essentially the AI and data science learning resource that we've
Mm.
just launched on Canvas. We've had about 300 members have joined already.
Yeah.
And that is basically about 10 different ideas, one of them being for Gen AI.
Mm.
And then we've got a couple of people who are looking at the Gen AI. They're experts. John Shen, one of our
Mhm.
counsellors, he's
Mhm.
kindly gives his time to say, if you want to know about Gen AI,
Yep.
why don't you have a look at these 10 items of interest, ranging
Great.
from papers to videos, podcasts, etc. And so this is just a modern version of that
Mm.
concept of
Mm.
the profession being uh, a fraternity or whatever the right word is of people
Mm.
who are willing to share information. So now we've got an electronic means that we can try and
Yeah.
share that.
Yeah. Curated information. And that's available to all Actuaries Institute members, Mike.
All Actuaries Institute members, yeah, just through our the website, you go through the CPD page from memory and just click a button and
Yeah,
it'll
excellent.
lead you. It'll give you some information on how to join.
Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, so thank you for sharing your story about how you've become an actuarial educator via being an actuary and some of your thinking around that education process. You now lead all aspects of the Actuaries Institute's education activities, and you've built a team of chief examiners to lead each subject. Can you tell us a bit about the role of this chief examiner in the new world?
Sure. So we didn't do things in a vacuum because, as you know, we've had many volunteers since for many, many years. I think 1980s when we started doing the fellowship Parents Free stuff in Australia. And so we've had all these volunteers over the years building on information. The change with the new chief examiner is that this person is responsible for the entire process, or they're responsible for the student journey. So they're responsible for making sure that there's adequate material for the student, that's of the right standard, education standard. There's enough worked examples. They run tutorials. They do write the exams with massive oversight from other people in the profession.
Mm.
And so they have these processes to work within, with an underlying or an overarching theme, if is the right way of saying it, is that the institute expects a well-prepared student should pass. So the chief examiner's role is to make sure that they're giving students that opportunity. They are preparing them. Clearly, the students themselves have to do all the work and all the excess hours and the crying at midnight because they don't understand a learning objective and endless cups of tea and biscuits as we all do.
We've all been there, Mike, haven't we?
So they're with that theme, and then we can look at all the chief examiners and we can work with all of them and have a set of processes by which they all do this. And which means, for example, when you come to do an exam, as you go through your various stages, when you open up the exam paper, obviously you're going to panic and thinking, well, how did they dream up these questions? Yet there'll be a similar structure. For example, the way that we ask questions and the way that we write
Mm.
marking guides, there's a lot of consistency throughout
Mm.
the processes.
Mm.
And that then gives people a fairer chance. They're not going to turn up and it's just some random, it'll feel like a random question, of course, but there will be like a scientific basis behind
Mm.
what's been
Mm.
asked of students.
Mm. It's connected to the learning outcomes, it's connected to what they've been taught and the materials as well. So
Yeah.
it should be a level playing field.
Yeah, and exactly, and the chief examiners themselves have to make this material contemporary because
Mm.
one of the things you come out at the end of the process is, whether you're at an associate level or at the fellowship level, you're at, if you say the fellowship level and you take the general insurance applications, you're at the level of a newly qualified actually. And that's a very big question. What does that really mean?
Mm.
What I mean by it is that you've been exposed to the information that a senior actuary would know about,
Yeah.
but we've examined you appropriately, so you've demonstrated to us that you've understood the concepts.
Mm,
So
mm,
that, and that's like the chief examiner's role. So they have to think not about the student journey, but they have to make sure that student gets to the standard required. And
mm,
so they have to involve themselves in as observers to various practice committees and really understanding what's going on at the institute and the profession itself. Plus all those new things, all the sort of the Gen AI, and how does that affect the way that you examine, and how does that affect the way that you set assessments to
mm.
make sure you're testing somebody's ability to demonstrate they understand a learning objective rather than their ability to put a response into ChatGPT or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and we could probably talk a lot about the impact of Gen AI on education. I know it's a hot topic right across not just what we're doing with the Actuaries Institute, but across universities as well. But I guess it comes back to that point that you were making about making sure that our learning materials are contemporary and that we're assessing in a way that's actually, checking that our students have learnt the learning outcomes and that they're equipped to go into the workplace and be actuaries in today's workplace.
Oh, absolutely. And the qualification journey itself is vitally important, but we should always remember that it's a part of your lifelong
Mm,
journey. It's
mm.
a formal part, it's a huge part, and it's a wonderful part to get through. And the sense of relief. I'm going to the graduation dinner in Melbourne Tuesday night, and there'll be
Nice.
so many happy people there who have
Yeah.
got through that. So, and plus they're beaming parents who've stood
Yeah.
by them and given lots of support over the time. But it just doesn't end there. You know,
No.
it's
No,
going
it
on.
doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, and even though that dinner is such a big milestone for us in our actuarial careers, our education doesn't end at that dinner. It doesn't end when we become an associate or a fellow. But Mike, what do you think needs to change to make sure that actuaries have what they need to continue that lifelong learning once they've finished their formal education?
There was a great speech a long, long time ago. Told you I was a history buff, and I'm not going to make an apology for this. In 1968, the then president of the Institute of Actuaries in London, James Pegler, um, described the model that you'd probably recognize today is very much that the qualification process was largely learning all the jargon that we use as actuaries.
Yep.
And then the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to work with your peers to figure out, well, what did that all mean? And how do I apply it in practice? Till you get to some sort of nirvana. I don't think he used the word nirvana, but some ultimate state that you're an expert, a true expert, which meant that you could go and talk to, for example, a board of directors without using the jargon itself. So that's the sort of the journey that we're on.
Mm.
So we've got this very formal part at the beginning, and then we sort of leave people alone. So if you're in a big firm, there are a few big firms in Australia, you know, corporates and consultants, where there's probably a big program for people to understand that journey as they take on more responsibility and work. But I think the profession itself, we could do more. We could think about having more structured programs on that technical side,
Mm.
helping people to realize that those exams you sat were professional development exams. They're necessary for your workforce. They weren't just a hurdle to go through. So there's a bit of back and forth. If we went back in time, there was probably constancy in the material that you had and what the generation before was taught. That doesn't apply now. If you look at what's in the fellowship material and in the foundation, the part ones in for many listeners, lexicography, what's in there? It's very different to what
Mm.
we studied type
Mm.
things. The foundation stuff contains a lot of what people call model statistics.
Oh.
Uh, so a lot of GLMs and GBMs are in the early stuff. A lot of time series things, as well as the traditional type stuff. And everybody will be pleased to know that those things that we got burned on, those endless symbol manipulations of those commutation functions are no longer in the course.
Oh, right.
all the concepts are still in there. The fellowship subject itself is very contemporary, so it's contemporary practice. So
Mm.
I always give a big shout out to Georgina Hemmings, who did a change to the life course a few years ago. She put IFRS 17. She
That's
had a
right.
lot of support from people around, but she did lead it and got IFRS 17 in before it was sort of like formally launched in Australia. So that's an example of it is leading. We'll always change it and that's with a big help, obviously, of the profession.
Mm.
So that's the sort of technical component. But there's this huge thing that the very inappropriately called soft skills, which are
Soft
much
skills. Yeah.
to things. And this area, I think there's a growing development and need within us. We all recognise that we have to learn to write better and communicate better and negotiate better and think how to listen to people better. Um, but maybe there's room for that to grow in the profession. So there's the continuation of other things that we do, the thought leadership papers, insight sessions, the great work all the practice committees do. All that's going to carry on. Maybe there's a bit of sort of like sticking bits together to to get people to change our culture to be those lifelong learners.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because it sounds like, Mike, you learnt some of those. I'm going to use the word soft skills because you used it, but communication and leadership skills, you learnt those on the job in your early roles. Or maybe you already brought them to the roles, I'm not sure. But I guess we all come with a different sort of baseline around those skills. It's not part of our formal education at this stage.
Well, I was lucky enough to fail many times and have a career that went up and down, up and down, up and down, but just was persevered
Yeah.
with it. I didn't have a natural styles. I was hopeless at communication because all I wanted to do was maths.
Right.
Right? And I still do now. I'd love to squirrel away and do some maths in the background.
Mhm.
Um, but and it wasn't until I was because I was in a traditional life company, you didn't get a lot of opportunities to do much writing.
Mm.
But when I hit that sort of first sort of mid-senior management role, and I was watching this guy write a report to a board, and I was thinking, that's the course notes. You're just stealing them. And there was just I didn't even make the connection between the course notes and how to use them in work. Um, but I realized that you have to learn to write, you have to communicate, and that's the main one. And the best writing I've done is more recently over the last 6 years because we've been forced to learn to write properly as we've rewrote the education material. So go through 10,000 pages of writing, and that's enough to supercharge
A lot of
your
practice.
writing skills. But there's so many other things we need to learn. I mean,
Mm.
obviously we're a very broad church of people in the actuarial community. There's many that like to be, so I don't really care much for that. I want to do my type of valuation work that they like doing, and there's a room for that. And then there's a room for
Mm.
the ones right up front who they're no longer actuaries in the sense of the day-to-day work, but they retain those actuarial skills as their C-suite executives, etc., and leading businesses around the world. So there's there's a broad set of skills that we need to help, and I think it's just understanding what the membership needs and what the membership wants. And when I say membership, I don't mean the individual member, I mean the individual and the collective. So for an individual to say, I don't need that, whereas the collective say, oh, well, we think you do. And so
Yeah, I mean, we exist within an ecosystem, don't we? So, and so much diversity across that ecosystem of our profession. Actuaries in different roles with different needs, and those needs won't be static. They'll change throughout the career continuum as well. So, even though an actuary might be saying, as you've just, the example you've just given, oh, I'm in a valuation role, this is what I'm doing. Well, that's fine, but you may not be doing that for the rest of your career. You may want to move into a different role and you might need some different skills to do that. So what's available to tap into to learn what you need?
exactly. And so our members over the last sort of 5 years, the younger ones have gone through the associate program. I think it's 5 or maybe 4 years. We've forced them to do the data science principles type stuff because we used to be the data analytics working group recognize, the foundation syllabus not strong enough. It needs to have this component in there. So the young ones are coming through and they're seeing it. They're used to doing R and Python, as well, obviously Excel. It's just a bread and butter to them. And these techniques, they pick them up. You go and talk to a young person, they'll use words quite freely that sometimes don't mean much to some of us. Oh yeah, I built an augmented neural network. I think, oh great, and they've picked up the new techniques easy,
Mm.
or quite readily. I think maybe that if you're more mid-career, we might want to think about those technical skills as well, upskilling. What change? The actual profession, if you think about it, there's not much pure actuarial stuff in the foundation staff. It's probability, statistics, economics. It's quite broad. There are a few things, the way that we do the life contingencies and the triangles type stuff, but they're really within a broader suite of skills. So we sort of beg and borrow the skills required to do the jobs. And now we're in a world where there's a lot more usable data. Then it's just natural that you need to build up those skill sets. So if
Mm.
you finished studying 10 years ago, you know that you're going to have to study now.
Yep, yep. And yeah, take your point as well about how this could be a great collaboration for us as a profession. There are people within the profession who know a lot about some of these new things and more contemporary skills and practices and techniques. And so we can collaborate and share our knowledge.
That's the cultural change, I think, from
Mm, mm.
the the borderline between formal and informal education is a bit blurry. We're always going to retain the qualification one,
Yeah.
just the minimum standard, if you like. But as you progress through your life, yes, of course, you might want to pick up a book and read a bit of it. But you can envisage a world where there are more qualifications later on. Not to give you, the FIAA is the gold standard type stuff, and the associates are a great standard as well. So not forget that. But there are other things because how much have you truly learned if you've just picked up a book and read it, put it down, compared with you picked up a book and somebody says, "Well, take a test." It has to be appropriate because as you get uh, on in your career, um, there's more demanded of you in the day-to-day work. So you just don't have the capacity to do the long formal studies. Plus, there's other things, life events get in the way of doing that, having families and other things come along. But we still need to just help people on that journey. And I think that's the one is the helping them on that journey because technically there's enough out there. You don't need anybody else in the profession because you can use Google and other things. That's such a big ask of
Mm,
people.
mm.
So
It can be quite overwhelming. There's so much
yeah,
information. So if we can help each other to curate that down and make a bit more sense of it, like the example that you've given with data science, that's going to help a lot of people. It's going to help a lot of us.
sure.
Yeah, very good. Well, Mike, thanks for sharing your bit about your career journey and how you became an actuarial educator now, and also a little bit about the current education program at the Actuaries Institute, and also your thoughts on lifelong learning. I've got one more question for you, and it's this. Mike, what's your top tip for actuaries wanting to future-proof their careers?
In the early years, keep on learning to write. Mid mid career, that's largely around working with other people and working how to get the best out of them and the best out of yourself. I think so. Those softer skills, I think, are the best ones. You'll always do the technical stuff. You'll pick that up, but it's
Yeah,
those ones. That's the ones. Yeah.
it's
Okay.
interpersonal stuff, the communication stuff.
So
Great advice. Mike, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great having this chat. Thank
that's
you.
been a pleasure. Thanks. Julia. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.